Welcome to the first webinar of the course. I'm glad you're all here today. We're going to cover quite a range of things on the course, but first of all, it's probably helpful to know who is going to be teaching you. My name is Tracy. I'm positive behaviour support specialist and working as a consultant for SeeAbility at the moment. The rest of the course is going to be, I'm going to be delivering the elements of the course relating to positive behaviour support, and the rest of the course will be delivered by Caitlin Jones, who is a speech and language therapist here at SeeAbility, part of the specialist service team, and Jenny Gould, who is vision rehab specialist, part of the specialist services team as well. There will be some input from other members of the SeeAbility specialist service team. We're going to have 6 weeks of webinars and tutorials in between, which will hopefully translate to 6 weeks of fun and learning. There will be some work to do as well, but hopefully it will be a very interesting and interactive experience for you all. So today we will cover we'll start by looking at what is communication. We'll consider barriers to communication, and we'll then move on to looking at what we mean by positive behaviour support and what is behaviour. People quite often have preconceptions of when we say the term behaviour, but we're going to look in a bit more depth as to what that might mean. We're also lastly going to consider why communication is so important, especially to people's quality of life, their independent skills and learning, and some of the difficulties and barriers that might prevent positive communication occurring. So let's start.
What is communication? Communication is the effective exchange of information between two or more people. Being able to communicate involves getting messages in, so being a listener. This is referred to as understanding. And this information has to travel to the brain where it is processed, and then the brain has to send it to the lips or the hands in order to get the message out. This is referred to as expression. This may be the speaker, but remember that information expressively may not be through speech alone, it may be through a different method. When we refer to someone's communication, we often consider the level of understanding and how they express themselves. Often, people think these are in line with one another. They rarely are. So let's start with understanding. What do you think we mean by this? Understanding. This is what a person hears, sees, touches, smells, and tastes. In receiving incoming information, a person may have difficulties processing and understanding the meaning. So somewhere between hearing the information and it being processed by the brain, there is a breakdown which can lead to misunderstandings. When we refer to understanding, we're thinking about, is there a breakdown in how someone processes the information, as I've just mentioned? Does the person have knowledge of vocabulary, i.e., have they come across it before? Are words used in certain contexts, which means that the person is likely to be familiar with them? But if that same word was used in other environments or out of context, do they still understand it? Does the person understand words, jokes, ambiguities, or do they take things literally? We also need to think about how many words a person understands at any one time. Let's explore what I mean by this further. Let's take these 4 words. Give me the book. There are 4 words in this sentence, but how many of these words would a person need to understand in order to carry out the instruction? Well, it depends. How many clues have you given? How much of the information is redundant? In other words, they don't need to understand the word in order to be able to complete the instruction. For instance, if the person is sitting at a table and there is just one book on the table in front of you both, and you hold out your hand and look at the book while saying, "Give me the book," the person actually does not need to understand any of the words in the sentence in order to carry out the instructions. There are therefore no information-carrying words in the sentence on this occasion. If there are 2 objects on the table, a book and a cup, and you hold out your hand, look at the book, and say, "Give me the book," there are still no information carrying words in the sentence because you have provided all the clues to the person in order to follow the instruction. However, if you don't look at the book, then there is one information carrying word in the instruction. They have to be able to understand the word book, or be able to at least differentiate between a book and a cup, in order to be able to choose the object you are asking for. If you don't hold out your hand, then there are two information carrying words in the sentence. They have to understand book, like in the previous example, and because you are the only person in the room, they have to understand the concept give. If there were other people in the room and they weren't looking at the book or holding out their hand, then the person would need to understand book, give, and also me in order to follow the instruction. And this would mean they'd need to be able to understand 3 of the 4 words in the sentence. So as you can see, in one sentence, the amount somebody needs to understand really depends on how many clues you give away. Understanding or cause and effect. Did the person really understand? We often hear, they understand everything. But this is not always the case. We give a lot of clues to people. We point, gesture, look at what we're talking about, and we have routines. These are great tools to support someone's understanding, but can hide difficulties people may be having. What we then find is that without these clues, people don't do as they're told, do what they want, do something different. Let's use an example. You're supporting somebody at a mealtime. Let's call them K. You ask them if they are ready. They make a communicative response. This could be an arm movement, a facial expression, a vocalization. Let's take arm movement. You put the spoon in their hand. They take it to their mouth. They bring the spoon down, and you take the spoon from them. You load it, and next time you have the spoon, you ask them if they're ready. You hold back and you wait for the same communicative response, the raising of the arm. You get one, or close to one, and you give them the spoon again, and they take it to their mouth. You follow this process for every spoon. This communication becomes more intentional. They know that if they raise the arm, they get the spoon of food, and they keep doing it because it works, and so they learn a procedure that looks like understanding. But did the person understand, are you ready? Does the arm movement mean, yes, I am ready? Or did Kay learn that when they made the arm movement, they got something from it? In this scenario, the likelihood is the latter. Why? Because are you ready is an abstract concept. It's not a physical object. Whereas getting food on a spoon is. It's more concrete and motivating. If obtaining the food is pleasant and they do not struggle with spoon use, then the words "are you ready" in the presence of the spoon are a trigger for Kay to raise her arm and receive the spoon. The behaviour has been reinforced. Another aspect of understanding that we need to bear in mind is someone's visual memory. Remember that 80 to 90% of what we learn is through vision. Visual memory is being able to see, picture, or create an image in your head based on the word. When I say the word tree to you, can you picture it? What do you picture? The likelihood is that the majority of you will have pictured the tree as a whole, the trunk, the branches, and the leaves. But many of those we support that have a visual impairment, particularly a congenital visual impairment, may have had different experiences. They may have only felt the leaves or the trunk. Have they experienced the trunk as it goes up the tree to the branches and then to the leaves? So what about an elephant? What do you visualise? Again, was it an elephant as a whole? Someone with a congenital visual impairment, so a visual impairment since birth, may have a different experience. Let's think of this poem, The Blind Men and the Elephant. The Blind Men and the Elephant by John G. Sachs. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and, happening to fall against the broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "Why, bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho! What have we here, so very round and smooth and sharp? To me 'tis very clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hand, this boldly up he spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out his eager hand, and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like, is very plain," quoth he. "'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "Even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can, the marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so the men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So as you can see from the poem, it really depends on someone's learning history and the experiences that they've had. And this is really important to bear in mind because it will have an impact on the way someone we support learns. Processing time. This is the time it takes for the person to make sense of the information that has been said to them, and either follow through with what has been said or respond to it. If we know people we support have processing difficulties, in order to enable effective communication, we need to give them longer amounts of time to process what has been said. We also need to remember it may not only take time to process what has been said, but also take time for them to get their message out, so express themselves. Verbal and written forms are the most complex methods of communication. When we speak, like I am to you now, my words are gone the moment they are said. However, you have a presentation that you can go back to and refer to in order to remind yourselves of what I've said. Written forms of communication come later developmentally, and like speech, is abstract, which is why they are the most complex methods. Therefore, it's important that we support our communication with each individual we work with by using more meaningful methods for them, such as objects, photos, symbols, Makaton, etc., as they provide a physical prompt or reminder for someone of what has been said or what they are required to do. At the beginning, we said communication involved messages coming in, also referred to as understanding, and messages getting out, referred to as expression. We have explored understanding and factors to be aware of when we refer to someone's understanding. And now the other part of communication that we need to explore is expression. Expression is what a person says. This does not have to be through speech. Remember that someone can have good understanding, but they may have difficulties getting their message across to other people around them. So they may need to use other alternative methods to speech. Other methods include, but are not limited to, the following: gestures, body language, facial expressions. They may use objects, photos, signing, or electronic devices. Someone's method of communication may not always be obvious and can be misinterpreted. It is our role to be observant and to reflect on how the person is presenting and think, could it be the difficulties they have with their expression, which mean they can't make their wants and needs known to you? Is how they are presenting the only way they have to tell you what they need or they want? And can we teach a way for them to communicate their wants and needs in another way? To date, you would have spent time with the people in your service and have an understanding of their communication needs. And the topics we've discussed so far have enhanced your knowledge around what we mean by understanding and expression. Even when we are aware of someone's level of understanding and expressive skills, this is still not sufficient. Someone may have a means, a way of expressing themselves, and they may have a reason, so something to tell you, but they may not have the opportunities to do so. Or a communication breakdown may occur because someone has a reason to communicate and opportunities to do so, but they do not have a means of doing so. As an organisation, we support people's methods of communication, whether this be verbal or non-verbal, by recognising and valuing and actively promoting this within the person's environment. It is only when someone has all three, a means, a reason, and an opportunity available to them, that we will see effective communication. For people with a visual impairment, opportunities, experiences, and understandings can be missed if the information is not appropriately presented to them. So, if you know the person you support has a visual impairment, ensure that you know what their visual impairment is and how it may impact on interaction and communication. For example, they may not be facing you or giving you eye contact, but that does not mean they're not engaged with you. Or they may have an altered head or body position that enables them to use their vision more effectively. This is discussed further in a later module, but it's important to be aware that vision, amongst other things, can have an effect on communication.
So, what is PBS, positive behaviour support? Well, as the slide says here, it is a set of research-based strategies to use to increase quality of life and decrease problem behaviour. This is achieved by teaching new skills and making changes in a person's environment. So there's a few key terms that we need to consider when we're looking at this statement. One is what do we mean by quality of life? This is a big one. Positive behaviour support focuses on improving quality of life. So by quality of life, we don't just mean the environment or living conditions that somebody is in. Quality of life refers to the leisure activities they partake in, what their health is like, their emotional well-being, the frequency, the quality, and the level of social interactions and social support somebody has. Also refers to things like their financial situation. And other things like their cultural factors. So, do they have, do they practice a religion? Do they access cultural activities or interests? And also, really importantly, a person's independence and functional living skills. How independent is a person, and how well are they able to cope and manage with day-to-day demands of life independently and with support. So quality of life isn't just a kind of one-dimensional concept. It covers a huge range of things. If we were to rate our own quality of life, we would probably consider all of these different elements and aspects that I mentioned, plus a lot more. So positive behaviour support aims to increase quality of life, and it targets all of these areas. At the same time, as a kind of byproduct, it reduces problem behaviour. We're going to talk about what we mean by that in just a moment. But the processes positive behaviour support has to achieve this is by teaching new skills and changing the environment. It doesn't expect an individual to change by themselves. It knows that what we know and what the science of behaviour and scientific evidence tells us is that in order to make changes, we need to may have an input, we need to teach new skills, and we need to make changes to environments. So what do we mean by problem behaviour? If I say challenging behaviour, quite often you might conjure up an image of somebody that's aggressive or violent or shouts a lot, that is very overt in their behaviour. And we know that problem behaviour threatens quality of life. It restricts quality of life. It also, problem behaviour can also threaten somebody's safety. But one aspect of quality of life that we don't necessarily always consider is about restricting access to ordinary life. And what do we mean by ordinary life? Well, the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, about getting up, going shopping, taking care of our own personal hygiene, having conversations and friends with our friends and family and interactions, taking part in social and leisure activities. So by this, we don't just mean aggressive behaviour. Passivity is a challenge too. If somebody is very passive and doesn't engage much with other people, quite often they can be overlooked. And what we quite often find is people who are very passive don't particularly engage in access to ordinary life, because they're very, as I say, quite often overlooked. Many of the people we support experience restricted access to ordinary life, which can involve even things like doing chores. And in this respect, positive behaviour support helps us to develop support and strategies that are positive and proactive and enjoyable. It's ethical, it looks at people's quality of life and what they wish to achieve. So it's probably helpful now for you to think about your focal person, the person you've identified that you're going to be working with as part of this course. Think about their access to ordinary life. You may have already started doing your activity tracker, active participation tracker. So start to think about what parts of ordinary life do they engage in and are they involved in? Do they engage, even just looking at the images here, are they involved in going out and socialising out and eating food out, doing chores, doing washing up the dishes, being involved in general household maintenance or doing the shopping? And if they don't, why is that restricted? Why don't they? Why aren't they involved in those things? So, key messages about positive behaviour support. Quality of life rules. This is the main focus. Problem behaviour is addressed through positive behaviour support, but it's really a byproduct, or it's secondary. So what we always see is when we increase quality of life, when we teach new skills, as a result, problem behaviour decreases. There's a big focus on building skills, teaching new skills. Positive behaviour support also completely rejects the use of painful and shaming procedures. It's really all about being positive was one, proactive is another, looking to understand reasons for behaviour and working to meet unmet needs. And as a byproduct, we increase quality of life. Positive behaviour support also seeks to work in partnership with key stakeholders. It's not something that's ever done in isolation. So hence the reason why this course is also being delivered by a speech and language therapist and vision rehab specialist. So everybody is pulled together to provide the input into this course. These specialisms on their own don't necessarily work as well on their own as they do when they're all joined up and working together. So let's have a consider. Why don't some people communicate as well as they could? So we have this model here looking at opportunity, skills, learning history, and physical need. And many people just lack as has been discussed already, lack opportunities to communicate, opportunities to have those social interactions and socialise with other people. And even when people do have opportunities to communicate, possibly with a support worker, they're very often limited or just around the same issues. We quite often can rely on just the methods somebody already has to communicate, rather than teaching them new methods of communicating, which might extend their repertoire of communication and their skills. Which leads us on to lack of skills as well. Some people may just be able to communicate via facial expressions or a few symbols or signs, and may not have the skills to be able to communicate with a wider range of people than maybe those in their immediate vicinity, their immediate family or their immediate support workers. So if somebody has a lack of skills, it can really, really affect how well they communicate, because it might really limit who they can communicate to. We know also, as already been discussed, that life experiences can have a huge impact on how somebody views the world and learns about the world. If somebody has a visual or hearing impairment from birth versus when one that was maybe acquired later on in life, it affects how somebody is able to explore their environment and understand what's happening within their environment. And it also might influence how they react to new situations and learnt behaviour. There also might be practical barriers because of physical need, maybe not having access to assistive technology, or possibly having access to assistive technology but not the right skills or training or support to be able to use that technology appropriately and effectively. So there are a huge number of reasons why somebody might not communicate as well as they could. And what this shows us is that actually there's some very simple things that we might be able to do to very easily increase somebody's ability to communicate, the skills that they have and opportunities that they have to communicate. And in doing so, that in itself will increase somebody's quality of life. So I just want you to have a think for a moment. What sort of things would you do if you had difficulty speaking clearly or being understood? If perhaps you didn't know how to start a conversation or ask for what you wanted, you didn't have the skills to do that. Perhaps if you only had one or two things or activities that you enjoyed, and if you were totally dependent on others for food and drink, stimulation and interaction, you might not communicate or you might not behave in a way that you do now. So we can start to have an understanding of how some of the barriers to communication might affect somebody's behaviour. So we're now going to look at a very simple model of trying to understand behaviour. And this is called the ABC model, which stands for antecedent, behaviour and consequence. And some other words that can be used to explain this are, for antecedent, are trigger or cause, so what happens immediately before a behaviour. Behaviour itself is simply what happens, what somebody does. And then the consequence might be referred to as a result or effect, which is essentially what happens afterwards. So this very simple model can be used to explain quite complex behaviours. We're going to start off by looking at some very simple explanations, some simple models here. And as we go on through the course, we're going to use the same model to apply it to real life situations that you may encounter. So let's consider this here. The trigger or the antecedent is that the phone rings. The behaviour is that the person answers the phone, picks it up, holds it to the ear and says hello, or whatever the phone greeting is that they use. And then as a result, the person hopefully has an enjoyable telephone conversation and a nice chat with someone. So this really, we can see here, very, very simple model to explain the behaviour of answering a phone call. So one thing I want us to think about is why has the person answered the phone? If we go back to this behaviour here of the person picking up the phone, holding it to the ear and saying hello, why did they answer it? Now, most people would say it's because the phone has rung. There's been a trigger there. There's been an antecedent. The phone has rung, and because of that, the person has picked up the phone. What I want you to think about is if your shoe started ringing, started making the same noise that your phone does, would you take it off and hold it up to your ear? Possibly not. You might do if it's exactly the same ringtone as your mobile phone, for example. It would look a very odd thing to do. But the reason that people actually answer the phone when it rings is because we actually have a history of being reinforced, of having something happen, somebody there at the other end when we answer it, and generally having a nice experience at the end. It's not just because it's ringing. Because if everything in your house started ringing and making that noise, you wouldn't pick it up and answer it. Even if you did it once, because there'd be nobody there and nobody at the other end, you wouldn't do it again if it started ringing again. So we can start to see how the consequence, what happens directly after a behaviour, is actually really, really important. And what we know is that if something nice happens or positive happens after a behaviour, it's much more likely to happen again. So consider now if every time you answered the phone, it was a nuisance call. It was the call centre, somebody trying to offer you services to claim back on PPI or sell you double glazing, or a prank caller perhaps on the phone. If your phone kept ringing, and you had answered the phone a number of times, and had these kind of not very nice experiences from answering it, you would probably stop answering it. So we can see again that if behaviour that isn't so nice occurs, if it doesn't have a nice effect on you after it, you're unlikely to do it again. But if you answer it and it's your best friend calling who you haven't spoken to for a while, or you're somebody phoning to tell you you've won the lottery, or somebody you want to chat to, there you're likely to do it again. So again, we can see how consequences have a really, really important effect on the likelihood of behaviours happening again. Science tells us this. Huge amounts of studies and research has proven this. And so this is a really, really important understanding to have. That behaviour that results in some improvement for the person, some benefit to that person, is probably a better way of thinking about some benefit to that person, is likely to happen again. And that's a key element of understanding behaviour, and we can use this to help change behaviours to teach new skills. So here we go. Have you had an accident that wasn't your fault? You are likely not to pick up the phone in the same way. We've got the two different outcomes there. We know that behaviour that doesn't have much impact on the context somebody in, or isn't very pleasant, is less likely to happen again in the future. So when something nice happens after a behaviour, we have a nice consequence, and it increases the likelihood of something occurring again, a behaviour occurring again in the future. We call this a reinforcer. So a reinforcer increases the likelihood of a behaviour occurring again in the future. Reinforcer often gets confused for a reward, and I'm going to just very briefly explain what the difference is. A reward is what we think might work. We think might increase the likelihood of somebody doing something again. But we know everybody's preferences are different. We know, for example, I really love chocolate. And if somebody gives me a bit of chocolate every time I do the washing up, I'm more likely to want to go and do the washing up again because I think I'm going to get a bit of chocolate. But my sister doesn't like chocolate at all. So if she gets given the same consequence, chocolate after doing the washing up, she probably won't do it again because she's like, oh, I'm going to be made to eat some chocolate or given something that I don't want. It's not going to be as nice an experience for her. So a reinforcer is entirely personalised and individual. Reinforcers also change. So as I said, I really like chocolate. However, if I've been eating chocolate all morning and then somebody offers me some chocolate as a reinforcer, I'm probably not going to want to have it. Also, if I've just eaten a huge dinner and I'm completely full up, and I've gorged myself, I'm not going to want to then, I'm not going to be very responsive to chocolate either because I'll be very full up. So reinforcers are changeable. Rewards are what we think might work for people. That's the big thing. A reinforcer is what actually might work. So I give another example that's quite easy to think about within schools. Is a child displays a particular behaviour, and as a response, the teacher says to them, right, you're going to stay behind after school or after class and clean the whiteboard and tidy the books away. Now, for some children, that might be absolutely brilliant, and they might love that because they get to spend some time with a preferred adult. They get to take on some responsibility to clean the whiteboard, and they maybe don't want to go home or go out to play in the playground, and that's brilliant, and that will increase the likelihood of their behaviour occurring again, whatever it was that they done. But for other students, or on another day, that might actually not work as a reinforcer at all because the person doesn't want to be with that particular teacher. They want to be out with their friends. They're supposed to be doing an activity, and that would actually be sort of quite a punishing consequence for somebody. So the same reinforcer on different days can be effective or not. The same reinforcer can be effective for one person and not for another. And this is why we use the term reinforcer rather than reward, because a reward is what we think is going to work. We might say somebody's reward is to stay behind, clean the whiteboard and tidy up the books. but that's not going to be a reward for everyone. And there's lots of people it's not going to be a reward for at all. So what's the ethics of rewarding behaviour that we're expecting and that we want to see from people? Sometimes people get kind of tangled up about this, and should we be rewarding or giving, say rewards or some kind of outcome for people that do behaviours that we assume should already exist? Well, working hard is a behaviour that we value in our colleagues. But we get rewarded for this. We get rewarded in the way of payment at the end of the month. Would we continue to work hard, and would we continue to turn up to work if we didn't get paid? Well, possibly not. So we all get rewarded for what we do in different ways. Sometimes there's natural consequences. Sometimes there's outside tangible consequences. But actually, if a person understands that either a well done, a small bite of a snack, or a high five or a cup of tea, or a sticker on a chart actually increases the chances of them being successful and wanting to engage in an activity or task and do something again in the future, rather than being passive or challenging, and lacking in skills and communication, then that's actually the most ethical way of trying to stop unwanted behaviour and problem behaviour and helping somebody to learn new skills. As we see throughout the course, we don't continue to always provide the same high levels of reinforcement that we might start off doing. We're going to come into that much later on in the course. But this concept of providing a reinforcer, or reinforcing a behaviour to increase the likelihood of that occurring again, increase the likelihood of success of somebody becoming involved in an activity and wanting to engage in that activity and getting it right, is really, really powerful. So what might be helpful for you to do is to start thinking about your focal person, thinking about their likes and their dislikes, thinking about what they might find reinforcing. Is it a pat on the back and a high five? Is it being given some verbal praise? I know many people really love and relish receiving verbal praise, and other people really don't at all. They find it quite aversive. Is it M&Ms, or a drink of Tizer or Pepsi, or is it a sticker on a chart? It's going to be different for everybody, but having an understanding of what your focal person finds reinforcing is really, really helpful, because as we go through this course and you start planning and you start implementing, teaching your focal person a new skill, you're going to be able to use that knowledge and that understanding of their preferences to be able to help shape their behaviour and teach them new skills. So, what else? So this one here, setting events. This is another aspect that's really, really helpful to have an understanding of in terms of explaining behaviour. A setting event can be something that happened in the past. We quite often are thinking about this because it's pretty much something that almost always precedes the behaviour or happens at the same time as behaviour. And what a setting event does, it affects the likelihood of us responding to a trigger. So setting events might be things like being hungry, having a good or bad night's sleep, spending time being stuck in traffic, or being completely bored or overwhelmed with paperwork, as some of the examples here show. They can also be pleasant experiences, so in enjoying your online course or learning new skills, having a lovely walk to work in the bright sunshine, having a lovely conversation with a friend. So it can be really nice, pleasant things. What we know is that setting events build up over time, and they increase a person's level of tolerance or sensitivity to future events. So an example being, as I've said, if I've had a terrible night's sleep and I come to work, and the moment I come into work, somebody starts asking me lots of questions about a particular topic at work, I might respond in quite a grumpy, grouchy way. Now, that's the trigger or the antecedent is being asked lots of questions. That's not affected my response. What's affected my response is that setting event of having a really bad night's sleep. I'm going to give you another example here. In just a moment, of if you're hungry and you see a sandwich on the side, you're much more likely to pick that sandwich up and eat it than if you're not hungry. So we can see again how setting events can affect somebody's the likelihood of somebody responding in a certain way to a trigger. We'll come on to that again in a moment. So a bit more about triggers. A trigger is the event that happens immediately before behaviour that seems, as I said, seems to cause it. If we think about that context of the phone ringing, it can seem like the phone ringing causes the person to pick it up. But as we now know, it's really what occurs, what causes somebody to continue picking up a phone when it rings is what happens afterwards. So a trigger is also known as an antecedent. And being aware of what somebody's potential triggers are for challenging behaviour, especially, can be really, really helpful in the first step in reducing the problem behaviour or challenging behaviour. So we know that knowing triggers can help people to avoid them. It can also help us to predict specific times that challenging behaviour may be more likely to occur. So we can either help the person to cope with them better, or we can plan for managing that behaviour better. So the best way to kind of try and manage the triggers, because we can't remove every single trigger from an individual. We can't protect them from everything that's going on, because that also would massively reduce their quality of life, because they wouldn't interact or be involved with anything. So but if we can try and learn about people's setting events and help people manage their setting events, so if we know somebody has had a bad night's sleep, possibly reduce the demands that are on them. If we know that somebody is really hungry, make sure that before we make any demands, we make sure they have some food or a drink. Then we can really help start to shape and change behaviour. So some common triggers that we might see for challenging behaviour are being asked or told to do something, being told that they can't have something that they want. Sometimes a particular individual or activity might be a trigger. So maybe somebody that they've had a history of not getting on well with, or a particular activity that they've had a history of not doing particularly well on or not enjoying. Noisy, hot or crowded environments, being bored or not spoken to or involved with an activity. So we can see that, as I say, if we can start to understand triggers and learn about triggers and learn about setting events for an individual, we can start to make changes in somebody's environment. And this is what PBS is involved in very much, is changing somebody's environment so that we can reduce the likelihood of challenging behaviour occurring. And what we can do is, if we know we're working with somebody who regularly displays challenging behaviour, we can just start to make some notes on what happens before the challenging behaviour occurs, what happens during, and what happens after, and that can really help us build up a good picture of somebody's triggers. And later on, we're going to talk a bit more about functions of behaviour, and we're going to look at how we can try and identify those from considering the consequences and setting events and the whole model of behaviour. So let's have another look at our model of behaviour. Now we've added the setting events into the mix, and I'm going to give you another example here. We've got somebody who's hungry. That's the setting event. They haven't eaten for a while, so they've been a bit deprived of food. The antecedent is they see the vending machine. So seeing the vending machine and being hungry is going to make it much more likely that somebody engages in the behaviour of putting money in and making a selection. If this individual here was not very hungry at all, and he had already eaten lots, he might see the vending machine, which would be absolutely the same antecedent, the same trigger, but they might not put the money in and make the selection because they're not hungry. And then the consequence is that they'll obtain snacks to eat. So we can start to see how this setting event here of being hungry affects the likelihood of somebody responding to a trigger or an antecedent. The other thing to consider, just in terms of understanding how consequences affect our behaviour, is think about this way. If I put my money into a vending machine and I didn't get any snacks out, it just got stuck or just nothing happened, I'm much less likely to do that again in the future. So my response or my behavior of putting money in and making a selection will be based on my history of knowing and experiencing that putting money into a vending machine results in me getting my snacks to eat. If there's as I say, if there's a 40 vending machine, and you put your money in, you never get anything out, you're unlikely to do that again. So this consequence is really important. Getting snacks to eat as a result of putting your money in is going to make it much more likely that in the future, next time I'm hungry and I see a vending machine, I'm going to carry out this behaviour. So we can start to see how these different aspects of the ABC model fit together and help us try and explain behaviour. And as we said before, when we think about the triggers here, understanding behaviours really can help us to make the environmental changes to try and prevent behaviours we don't want to see.
So let's go back with the example with Kay. You're supporting Kay at a mealtime, and remember Kay's been asked to raise her arm in order to have the spoon given to her. In this other example, Kay raises her arm, but the staff member B interprets this as Kay being unhappy or hitting out. So Kay stops raising her arm and starts blowing raspberries. The staff member then places the spoon in her hand, and Kay then takes the spoon independently to her mouth and brings the spoon down, and then the staff member takes it from her. The staff member loads the spoon and then waits. At this point, what does Kay do next? Does Kay raise her arm or blow raspberries? And this is what contributes to confusion for people we support, leading to frustration and often behaviours that challenge. So this could present as self-harming, throwing of the spoon, shouting, or somebody could go the other way and be more passive. So the person just gives up lifting their arm or blowing raspberries altogether. And then this may lead to the staff doing it for them. So this may mean that the person loses the skills that they either once had or were starting to learn. To reduce confusion and frustration, staff member A could have shared what they were doing with other members of the team. Then, staff member B could have adopted the same approach, allowing the blowing of the raspberries to be shaped for a different communicative response. So instead of Kay having two methods to communicate the same thing, she could have had two ways of communicating two different things, broadening the communication that was available. Providing immediate reinforcement for the relevant behaviour is essential in aiding skill development. Let's think about this a different way. The example before was specific to a meal, but shaping and losing and gaining skills can happen in everyday natural living environments. So let's consider the following question. Why do you see the people we support interact more with staff than with their peers? Well, staff are more likely to give them a response. Their peers may be less physically able to, or less communicative, or have their own communication difficulties. And more often than not, they are not able to meet the needs or wants of the person. The person goes to those who are able to meet their needs the quickest, and more often than not, that's staff. We have to be mindful of not imposing our values on the people we support. When we work with communication and behaviour, we use things that are motivating for someone. How motivating is learning please and thank you? This is often important for us as staff to feel valued and appreciated, but how important is it to someone who has limited communication skills? And what would they get in return for using it? If you only had 5 words that you could communicate to someone, what 5 things would you want to say? Pause the presentation and have a think about this and write down what 5 things you would choose to say. So did you use up 2 of your 5 words with please and thank you? Or did you choose words that were going to give you something? Did you choose words like drink, food, sleep, bored? Because if you tell someone you're bored, you're likely to get something, to be given something to do. Or did you choose things like toilet, help, music, because that's really important to you? Or something like being able to ask about your family? These are just examples of things that are often hot topics for people. After this presentation, speak to a colleague or a family member when you get home and see what 5 things they would choose if they were only able to communicate 5 words, and compare them to the ones you chose. Reflect on this and think about how would you feel if you could only use their 5 words. Behaviour is a form of communication, and we are all human, and we all have wants and needs, and we can all get frustrated and experience challenges. The people we support are no different. The way we respond to people will change their behaviours. It is important to reflect on situations and consider what may have impacted on the person's mood or response. This could be them crying in the corner, or sitting, not saying anything, or even be in fits of laughter, because knowing what makes someone happy is equally, if not more important. Always question, what is the person saying to me? Today, am I part of the problem or part of the solution?